Thank you so much. Thanks for the kind introduction. And again, thanks for inviting me here. So now it's getting Friday afternoon, and everyone are thinking about drinks and dinner and so. But you need to listen to this about blockchain first, because it's way more exciting than dinners and drinks. So bear with that. First of all, Chainalysis, what are we doing? So Chainalysis, we are a company, we are 11 people, we're based out of New York. We do compliance solutions for blockchain. So we essentially usually tell that we do make the compliance layer for the future of value transfer. But I'm not going to tell you much about our product today, because that's just a sales pitch, and I don't like to do sales pitches. So what I'm going to talk about is essentially how blockchain is really the things of the internet. And what do I mean by that? So we're getting to that point. And also we're going to talk about how blockchain in many ways is not really financial technology, but more like regulational or compliance technology, and why that matters. So let's move on. So first of all, we have a few advertisers here. You all know about them, I think. There's a lot of companies and big banks doing experiments with blockchains today. We have UBS did some smart bonds as a smart contract on a blockchain. Nasdaq did their first settlement around before New Year, I think, on a blockchain. So it's all kind of experimental phase, and a lot of enthusiasm also within banks today. We have Barclays there as well, doing both activity in R3, the consortium, but also we have they're active in the Bitcoin space as well. So R3, they've been mentioned earlier. So R3, they're quite an important grouping of a lot of banks, and I think that banks have been doing a lot of collaborations before, but this is kind of the first time it had reached the same level of press and attention and so. And it's a lot of banks, more than 40 banks, working together to define use cases and other things on essentially how they can use the blockchain to change their infrastructure. But let's jump back to what blockchain really is about. So the blockchain, to the Wikipedia definition of that one, that's not mine. It's essentially a permissionless distributed database, and it's somehow hardened against tampering. And I think that's really the key of the blockchain. You could also put it in another way, and that's kind of, once you understood the blockchain, you would say, oh, but it's just digital scarcity. That's what it's all about. And then the rest of people say, what are you talking about? I don't get that. Digital scarcity, what is that? But essentially, when we have anything digital, we're used to being able to copy it. And it essentially means that everything that we have, when I send you a mail, I'm not sending you the mail, I'm sending you a copy of the mail. And if I buy a song, I'm buying a copy of that one. Pictures, we copy pictures. So everything that we have in digital space, we are used to being able to copy that. On the blockchain, you suddenly are able to move things digitally. So they only have one representation, and that's really the key feature of the blockchain. And it's big, and it's one of the paradigm shifts in computing. And that's why I personally find it extremely exciting that now you have an ability to produce something digitally that have, well, a finite number or scarcity. That can be used for many things. Let's see how this works. So this is an example of a blockchain here. It's global, as you can see. It has one state. And also this state is kind of shared all over. And we have just used it to the most simple use case of all. We took some digital documents, made digital fingerprints of those, and then put them in a block and put them in a blockchain. So this could be used for example, proving that I knew something at a certain point in time. That's nice for doing your company log, or it's also nice for proving that you were the one to invent something. Then you can do something else. So this is all running on computers, and computers are pretty good at logic and this kind of logic machinery. So you can actually do contracts there or do rules around what can go into the next block. So the example here essentially shows, well, I run a bar and I want to give out vouchers for 10 beers, and I can issue them. That's a green transaction first, and then I put some logic in there that tells me that the number of beers will be constant over time, so it means that I can hand one over to someone else, and well, I can't create anyone else in the next step. I could also add a more advanced rule and say, well, I can actually make the rule so that in 10 days or so, I'm going to get the voucher of the beer back if you didn't use it. Further, I could just have added, well, or we cancel it at all, so it's kind of useless after a certain point in time. So that's smart contracts. So now you know everything you want to know about smart contracts. And essentially, as it's digital, you can build all kind of fancy frameworks around them and code a lot of things there. So we talked about disruption, and Nick also mentioned disruption, Big Bang disruption. I'm kind of inclined to say that I'm starting to look at where everything is slow and not where it suddenly goes fast. So I might agree that we at some point will have a snap and everything will be really, really quick and fast. But right now we are definitely on the slow movement here. So what is disruption about? I usually like to show this picture here around disruption. That's from Clayton Christensen. And essentially that was one of his examples of a disruptive technology. So the combustion engine car, that was not a disruptive innovation at all. It was just, well, cool and revolutionary in any way, but nothing really changed with the combustion engine. It was just, well, nice for us to look at this Mercedes-Benz over at the left. It can run very fast compared to horse wagons, and people love to look at that one. And a few rich people could buy it, but it didn't change the world. Then we have the 4T to the right, and it's not really the fact that it has a combustion engine, but the fact is that now they changed the way to mass produce it. So they could suddenly mass produce, or Ford learned how to mass produce cars in a way that you suddenly could have extremely cheap production of cars, and that meant that suddenly it could outcompete horse wagons and trains and everything else, and everyone wanted to own a car because it didn't cost anything anymore. So that was disruption, because it started to change, have socio-economic changes in the society, and that, well, changes a lot of things. Another important example that's much more from our time is voice over IP. So voice over IP is cool. It's technology where you can take voice, like I'm speaking now, and compress it, encode it, and put it into a data channel. And that's nice, and in the 90s we had these IP phones. I'm pretty sure we can find some IP phones in the exchange here. We all saw that as, well, nice technology. We are building infrastructure. We are renewing the infrastructure for the phone companies, and that's great and all good. But it's not really disruptive in any way. It's kind of, well, everyone that could talk to long distance before or call long distance, they could still do the same, but they had, well, now they could see the caller and they could, well, do some fancy meetings and so perhaps multiple people on the line at the same time, but not disruption, right? On the other hand, we have Skype. They used the same technology, and then they also used the fact that suddenly the data channel were more or less for free because you had the internet. It didn't work, obviously. It was kind of, it was awful. The quality was awful. You kind of sounded like Darth Vader on the line, and everything was, people didn't really like the quality. And I worked in a network telco kind of company back then, and all of us were kind of shaking our heads and said, well, yeah, it's not going to work. They don't have quality of service on the lines, so the quality will stay bad, and no one is really going to use it for anything serious. But again, serious, what does that mean? Today, the whole world is connected through the internet and using voice over IP and video over IP as well. And it's kind of, I would say, it's disruption in many ways. We still have telco companies, but earning money on minutes, it's getting harder, and I think we are on the snap now, where minutes doesn't count anymore. We're only in data. So why blockchain? There's kind of different properties you need to consider when you're looking at why something is disruptive. And some of the properties that we really have to look at in the blockchain world is the two. So convertibility and certifiability. I kind of touched it a little bit before on the panel. So let's say you look at a house. A house that's certifiable. You usually have a registry of houses in a country. And it's nice because then you can actually have a loan in a house, and you know as a bank that you didn't go to 2 or 3 other banks and had the same loan in your house and so. So that enables you to have financial instruments because you have a registry. The same goes for cars, in many countries at least. Well, when you go to the other objects like chairs and groceries, bikes and so, you don't have a registry of those. Convertibility. A house, in principle, it's convertible. I could essentially today buy, well, a bottle of water with my house. I would need to go to some lawyers, get it stamped, get it registered into the registry, and then he would now own a small part of my house, and I would get my bottle of water in return. But it's going to be way too expensive to do that, so essentially it wouldn't work. Other objects today are convertible, theater tickets and other things. That's kind of already there. Yeah, and these are a lot of arrows that somehow got blurred out. So essentially it shows that all the stuff moves up here. It all moves up in the upper right corner, and everything becomes, well, if you put things on the blockchain, you get a representation of everything that we know and love today on a blockchain. Suddenly you can convert it. Suddenly it becomes completely trivial to buy a bottle of water with a small claim in my house. And this means that everything becomes money. And that's cool. And that's new. And that's something that have a potential to revolutionize the world in many ways. So you can build all kinds of fancy financial products and finance and microfinance and a lot of other things on the blockchain, which is totally cool. So I call this the things of the internet, because suddenly all the things we have, they moved into the internet. And of course, the Internet of Things will also be there, and they're just digitally native, so they would actually know that they were there. So that's also cool. Okay, we also need to talk about another aspect of the blockchain, and to do that, I want to mention Uber. So Uber kind of do a full stack approach. So they're in a regulatory framework. They have a regulatory framework around taxi driving. So if you actually want to do disruption in an area where you have heavy regulation, you need to solve also the regulatory challenge. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to follow the current regulation, but you need to show that your technology is superior in the way that it solves the reason why you had the regulation in the first place. So Uber does that through a smart rating system, so you actually know that the driver is kind of a nice guy and drives probably pretty well, otherwise he's not going to get my 5 stars. On top of that, they have a GPS tracking of me and the driver, and it means that he's probably not going to kill me, and I'm probably not going to kill him either, because, well, they would figure it out, so that's not a good idea. And I have actually a funny example. I went to an airport in US 3 weeks ago, and I went out to the airport with jet lagged, and then I was thinking, I need to get an Uber here, and at the airport it's always annoying because I need to find the driver, he needs to find me, and suddenly there was a guy standing with an Uber sign. I said, oh, that's nice, that's a new concept. And I just jumped into the car, stupid, because then he drove off, and it wasn't Uber, it was just a private taxi, and he just wanted my money. I got to the place I needed to, but I was definitely not safe there. So the same security that you get with Uber, you don't get that in a private taxi. So I actually felt that they had solved the regulatory problem. That also goes for the blockchain. So the big box there is also an arrow. Somehow they get into boxes. So this is the third part, the third axis of the graph of the blockchain. So it also solves the regulatory issue. It provides auditability, and it does that through transparency. So essentially, if you move things on a ledger, on a public ledger, everyone can see what you do, or at least that something happens. And if you move it on a private ledger, all the participants can see the implications of your transactions. So that brings me to this slide here. So the fact that you actually have a technology now that solves a regulatory issue is also kind of RegTech. So it's regulatory technology. And the biggest problem in finance today, and where you actually can compete, is how good you are at doing your compliance. Because at the end of the day, moving money is trivial, but actually doing it in a compliant way and not getting defrauded or facilitate money laundering, that's the hard part. Okay, now I want to show you that this actually can be done today. So this was all kind of the 20-year vision, this can be done at some point and so. But we're actually doing that today. And today there's a blockchain out there, it's called the Bitcoin blockchain. I should state, disclaimer, I'm not necessarily certain that this will be the blockchain of the future, but it's there, it's been around for 7 years. And we've seen a lot of funny stuff happening on the Bitcoin blockchain, anything from fancy and funny business models, clever business models, to crime and fraud, Ponzi schemes and so. So everything had happened there that we can anticipate to be happening on well, the world's blockchain in the future. So let's have a look at how you solve compliance on that blockchain. So it all starts with a Bitcoin company. This one, let's say it's a payment processor, and he's active on the Bitcoin blockchain, that's a network there. And he essentially wants to enable a cafe to sell hipster coffee in San Francisco, and to do that and have the people paying with Bitcoin. To do that, he needs to ensure that the business exists, do proper compliance around it, and follow and know that what's the origin of funds. And if you have digital money, you could of course ask the origin of funds from the people when they meet up. So essentially the coffee owner, where do you get your money from? I'm selling coffee. Check that. Does the coffee originate from any criminal activity? I don't think so. Who's your customers and so? It all gets very complicated. But we can actually utilize the fact that now we have digital money, and this money can be traced if you use the right tools. And we provide tools for example, payment processors in the Bitcoin space, by which they can trace the origin of funds and see where does it originate from. Is it the proceeds of crime? Is it stolen Bitcoins? Or do they originate directly from Coinbase or from Corbit or from another exchange that actually sells Bitcoin in a completely legitimate way? So the conundrum in Bitcoin, how to get a bank account. That's really the biggest problem, and it's the reason why we started our company. So how do you do that? So essentially the Bitcoin companies want to show the bank, we're doing fine, you can see all the numbers, it's all in the blockchain. But the bank can't understand that, of course. It's kind of just ones and zeros, and you don't get any real value from that. So what can we do? So essentially by providing the right tools for the banks and create a compliance program for them around how to onboard digital currency businesses, they can utilize the fact that all transactions are public in the blockchain. So they can actually follow what goes on in the company. So they don't need to ask the company for audits and have auditors looking at that and understanding that. They can actually look at the public data and see immediately whether this company they want to onboard operates above board or not. Same goes for regulators. We also sell product to regulators. A lot of Bitcoin businesses today are under some form of regulation, and that's utilized by regulators today, that they also can use the public blockchain to monitor these companies that they follow the rules. So this is an example of everything that happened on the Bitcoin blockchain in 2015. You see a lot of transfers between exchanges. That's arbitrage, and it also covers for a lot of peer-to-peer exchange transfers, so essentially remittance and so, which is kind of the purpose of Bitcoin. You see the red one, right red up there, that's actually dark markets. You see mining, and you see gambling, the purple one, and mixing services and so. So you can do all this data you can actually take out from the public blockchain, the ledger, if you use the right tools.
We have about 3 minutes to wrap up, please.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So this is the other thing you have on the blockchain is called crime. So that's cybercrime, that's a guy up there, and police. And how do they do this? Well, again, they use the right tools, and by that they can actually put the criminals behind bars. They can follow the origin of funds, and well, that's how you solve crime in Bitcoin space. So we partner with the Europol in the company to do to help them train people to do the officers in Europe to train them to solve digital crimes in the digital space, and also and that's kind of big, I think, because we also enabled Barclays to onboard a Bitcoin company, and that's the first time you see a tier 1 bank onboard a company in the Bitcoin and blockchain space. And that's because today the proper tools and methods to actually monitor them, they are in place. And that's actually the first time in 10 years. So you know banks have been de-risking. That was mentioned around the PSD2 as well. So banks have been de-risking the last 10 years or more, and for good reasons as I see it. So you had a lot of smaller money transmitters, prepaid businesses and so, and they're all kind of high risk and they don't know what they were doing. But in the Bitcoin space, it's different today because you have the proper tools in place. So you can actually include companies that's active in this space, and that's also what paves the way for the future and what we're going to see on the blockchain, whatever that might be in the future. So that's all. Thanks.
Any questions from the floor? Always the first.
In a payment processing business, it is very critical to know your client and the anti-money laundering. Now you are saying that the blockchain can be used for the certifiability. But when I look at it as a chain of a transaction, how I can figure it out the nature, whether it is not AML or the how can I identify the KYC? And
So-
furthermore, even I figured it out that if the previous transaction occurred through the other instrument, like money currency, then there is a broken line in this chain. So how I can provide the certifiability and the auditability for the KYC and the AML?
Yeah, so today there's a lot of players, essentially all the exchange points on the Bitcoin blockchain, they are being regulated today, or some of them are about to be regulated. So kind of the idea is that every time you can exit and enter the digital economy, you have a player, an exchange player, and they have to follow the normal rules with KYC. So what we can do is that we can trace the funds back to one of these players, and then we can tell law enforcement or whoever needs to know it that that's there. But that's not enough, because other point is that you ask whether you have proper AML and the different stack there. And the nice part there is that on the Bitcoin blockchain, we also know that there's bad money or criminal money there, and we can see if that was the input of the transaction. And then we can tell the payment processor, oh, you just received funds from something that's criminal activity, and you need to file a report to FinCEN about that. Yeah. Oh.
I have a question on, so I love the RegTech stuff, right? And I get the public transparency element of it, but I failed to see the accountability. So you mentioned that the entry point allows you to identify someone. In other words, on exchange, there's a KYC, that KYC is that block, and then you keep on tracing that block to that person that registered. So two questions. The first one is, out of all the Bitcoin in circulation, how many have been tagged to an actual identity of someone? And then the second one is, how do you ensure that actually the exchange doing the KYC does a proper KYC check? Because a lot of them, when they do it, they just do it online, say, give me a passport, a copy of your passport, but really, how can you tell a fake passport from a real one if you do it over a scan?
Yeah, so first touching on the KYC on exchanges. So many of them regulated. They need to follow the same rules as banks or payment institutes and so. They do pretty good KYC today, most of them. I ran an exchange myself before starting here, and I knew how to do it. We did the selfies thing with the passport, so that was actually one of our ideas. And it works quite well online. Of course, you can't know that all of them are doing it. And what we are doing, we are tagging the ones that are not. And they're kind of the questionable exchanges. And if you receive money from there, you should probably worry. So they actually participate in money laundering. So the other question you had, how many Bitcoin have been tagged to specific identities? That's very few. I don't think, well, I can find the rich people in Bitcoin easily in our tool. But I don't think that's really the point, because you don't really need to know who you're dealing with. I know the law says that, but if you look at it from a business decision point of view, you just want to know whether that transaction is high risk or not high risk. If it's low risk, you can keep low friction and say, well, I just received $100 for a purchase of something. I don't actually know who it was, but it seems like they came just directly from that exchange over there. And I know that exchange probably know who they sent it to. And if not, I can ask for more information or direct the law enforcement officer that will show up tomorrow if there's a problem to go there instead. So everything is kind of fine. And you don't necessarily need to know all the KYC information there. So the normal way that you solve that problem today is to do a lightweight KYC, which means, please tell me your name. And you write the name, and oh, you did KYC. And you know that's not checking anything, and you would never ask anyone to check anything for a lower amount of dollars. So it's not really worth that much. So as I see it in the future, we are probably going to move away from KYC first, to do AML first, and then have some traceabilities built into our financial system where you can find people. So when you talk to, for example, FBI agent, they usually tell us that when they trace money in this existing financial system, they always end up at a ghost account on a bank. And the bank have perfect KYC, right? So they go to the bank and suddenly they had some account that was taken over or whatever. But what's useful there are all the digital fingerprints. So for example, they had logged in from this IP address that was in Russia. They know it's the same cybercrime group, and they have other kind of traces there. And suddenly they might be able to build up a profile of a group or a certain person that did this scam or did this cybercrime, and then they can apprehend the people. So it's kind of the way it works today. It's not from the KYC they find people, it's actually from the digital fingerprints.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Let's give him a big hand. Thank you.